there is a variety of anarchism, so it would be very, very, very difficult to kind of explore the question by addressing the variety of anarchism. One way of thinking about this question would be to think that there is anarchism that embraces a collective aspect and an anarchism that embraces an individualist aspect. And it's that despite of all the various brands of anarchism, what you will notice that there are two major principles. One is the principle of an anti-statist principle. A lot of anarchists are against the state. All of anarchists are against the idea of the state, and it's not sort of by surprise, because anarchism is formed at the time when the state, modern state, becomes modern state. So it's a movement or an idea or a concept or a practice that attacks and sets itself against the state for one primarily reason, as I see it, as I understand it, and the primary reason is that the state, whether it's represented by this major representative as a sovereign or a president or in parliament, is that it has the monopoly of violence. Okay, so that's kind of one of the positions that anarchists find themselves being against or contesting. And you might ask the question, or we might continue to think about, is the state in its modern form or is it contemporary form really holds the monopoly of violence? And I would say yes, it does. I mean, even if we give ourselves, if we decide to think that the state is here to protect us, all right? It has institutions, apparatuses to protect us, like the police or the courts. For example, we can point out, even in our time, so many injustices or abuses of power by the police that the argument that the state is protecting us doesn't hold. On the contrary, it has the monopoly of violence and uses it to control populations and take us to war and not protect us. And two examples that I happen to teach criminal justice, so I can use kind of two contemporary examples from the UK that come to mind. That the murder of Stephen Lawrence, for example, is one prime example where the police as an institution demonstrates its panoply of this monopoly of power in the state in itself. And you might say, okay, but it gets redressed via the court system, via appeals, via retrials. But it takes a lot of years, and at the end of the day, you're never going to put back to life or bring back to life the individual that has lost their life. So that's one example. The other example is the example of the man in Tottenham that recently has been killed by the police, and as a result, the riots in August 2 years ago have been prompted. So that's kind of an example of how the police, as an apparatus of the state, abuses its power. So yeah, anarchists have this anti-statist position. To my mind, because of the state's monopoly of violence. The other principle is an anti-capitalism. Capital gets formed or becomes what it is now in its modern form at the same time, or around the same time as the modern state gets formed. Industrialists hold the monopoly of money or of wealth. So anarchism, I guess, is against the unfair distribution of wealth, the distribution of wealth being in a very small percentage of money. It's also the alienation of money from their labor, the circumstances in which such labor is being extracted. People are not paid equal paid salaries or that are representing the actual work that they're putting in. Like, for example, like, I guess you're film students, and a lot of you might in the future have to do internships where you might not be paid, or you're expected not to be paid or not get remuneration. Well, you have to kind of constantly ask, why is this happening? Where is the wealth being accumulated? Who possesses? Anarchists kind of are against this unfair distribution of wealth. Occupy movement, I guess, is that it made that kind of very apparent over the last 2.5 years by saying, we are the 99%, you are the 1%, you hold all the wealth and it's not distributed down. So they are anti-capitalism precisely for the reason that because of the accumulation of wealth being in a very small percentage of the population. Anarchism, what are the principles of anarchism? And I think anti-statism and anti-capitalism might be the two political principles of anarchism. I've been studying for a while at the Archives, a group of anarchists that lived from the end of 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century in New York. You probably know them. Emma got the group that was around Emma Goldman, which I think we've got a photo of there. And her associates, Alexander Bergman, and through their archives, through their letters, through the way that they express their ideas, I also noticed that anarchism is not just a merely political movement, it's an art of living, right? It's an art of living that, to me, holds a couple, 3 or 4 important qualities. First quality that I've noticed, and Emma Goldman was very good example of embodying this kind of quality, is fearlessness, right? When injustice, when they're facing injustices, and when they're facing police brutality, when they're facing police authority without legal justification, they're able to actually counter the law. They're able to counter the state without fear, and in a lot of extents, without being afraid to take the wrath of the law, being incarcerated. For example, Emma Goldman not only fought against the US getting into the First World War, kind of his anti-militarist campaign, but she also campaigned for the legalization of abortion. Okay, so there are a lot of kind of issues like that you're taking the risk at times when things are illegal, prohibited by the state, and make public statements that would risk arresting you and incarceration. So fearlessness is one. The other kind of characteristic, and I think it's a lot of the pamphlets, that the anarchist pamphlets that you'll encounter, both from the 19th century, but now if you go into Freedom Bookshop, you probably find a lot of pamphlets. You notice that it's a group of people that are using wit, right? They're using wit and humor to critique the state, right? So the other kind of character is not taking, while serious in their interest, in achieving their interest, in achieving justice, freedom, equality for all. They're also doing their critique via humor, so they're witty and humorous as well. The third, and I won't talk about this art of living, so it's fearlessness with humor, and the third one is honesty. They will never be shy to tell you what are they doing. At least those group of anarchists that I've been sort of reading in the archives, they will never say, no, we have not been publicly trying to make abortion legal. They will not hide, let's say, behind their statements, behind their beliefs. So transparency, honesty, frankness, I guess, are the kind of 3 major characteristics I see that they're part of their art of living. So there's a political aspect, anti-statist, anti-capitalist, but there's an aesthetic, if you want, dimension of anarchism, which encapsulates these 3 characteristics that we discussed. Well, I don't know what are the anarchist views on democracy, but I can tell you how I see the anarchist view on democracy. I guess they find, if they're anti-statist, then they will find kind of representative democracy as an anathema, right? It's precisely what they do not believe in. They do not think that a member of parliament or a president can represent the whole of society or people. So that's for clear. Representative is not what they believe in. But they would believe, I guess, in some fractions of anarchists. They would believe in a model of direct democracy, okay, where discussions about issues in groups, in associations, take into account everybody's position before they come to a consensus decision, right? So that would be a model that some kind of anarchist of direct democracy, consensus direct democracy, they would sort of accept. But I don't think, if you think about democracy in the way of representative democracy, it doesn't happen in that model or in that mode. It takes place in small association groups. And one, again, from this 19th century archive that I've been looking at, I've noticed that when they're discussing issues, for example, they might be discussing how are they going to propagate or tell people about the perils of going into war, like in that period of going into particular First World War. So there are discussions, but there are never records or votes around. Actually, records there are. At least I have the court records, but there are never votes about the final decision. There's a final decision that came about after a long, exhaustive debate, right? And I think so. Democracy is not. Democracy, I guess, is a form where, for them, will be a form whereby ideas gets exhausted and decisions are made through exhaustion, not through speed, not through thoughtlessness, but just slow exhaustion. Propaganda by the dead, you probably know. It's kind of an idea or a term that has been used in early anarchism to say that in order to prove or to show that you are an anarchist, you have to have a deed that demonstrates your beliefs. And early anarchism, early 19th century, late 18th to early 19th, one of those deeds that they used to do was to either bomb buildings, but it's not the same as symbolic violence. I'll give you an example. Alexander Bergman, who was a lover, friend and collaborator with Emma Goldman, he felt very, very unhappy at a particular period in the 19th century about the way that certain workers in a factory have been treated after they went on strike because they wanted better hours and better payment. How were they treated? They were killed. Okay, four workers were killed. So he felt aggrieved about the treatment of workers. So his intention was to kill the owner of this factory. So he attempted to kill him, but he failed. And there's a joke, I think Andy will probably, in Freedom, could tell you the joke that he's the only kind of late 19th century anarchist that failed to do his deed. All right, he's a kind of a failure. But that was the idea behind it. But I guess Can I ask you back to explain what do you understand by illegalism? Or what you had in mind when you kind of formulated that question?
Well, as I understand it, illegalism is a way of trying to deliberately live outside the law. So, say stealing a book from a library, but then returning it. But the point was that you weren't in the system. Am I?
Okay. No, I would have answered it more generally, I guess. I mean, do anarchists deliberately breach the law? Do they not believe in laws? And I would say no, they believe in the spirit of the law. Otherwise, they wouldn't kind of be making claims to equality for all, freedom, and autonomy. Some of the earlier anarchists have kind of very rationalist understanding of the world, so freedom, equality. So the spirit of the law, they would not, they will adhere to. There might be infringements, necessary infringements of legal of laws, but that kind of is very, very, very different. Do they live outside? I think it's kind of impossible for anybody to live in a state and say and make a claim that we live outside the law. We live within the law, but we might have different norms of living, and I think the distinction there would be between the law that we find in this country, in statutes or in cases, and the norms, the way that people live their lives, right? And I think anarchist norms, as I tried to suggest earlier when I talked about fearlessness, wit, and honesty, are kind of the guiding characteristics beyond, their own interests, beyond, that would kind of strictly separate them, I guess, from socialists, probably, but definitely from communists and liberals.
Yeah.